Why you were placed in a narcissist's life, the truth will shock you. You were the light sent into their darkness. You were not just born into this world to blend in, you were born to break patterns, to disrupt generational curses, to bring healing where there was hurt, to shine where others dimmed. And that's exactly what you did when you walked into that narcissist's life. You didn't arrive silently, you arrived with a power that challenged the very structure of their false identity. From the moment they met you, they knew something was different. They couldn't articulate it, they couldn't name it, but they felt it. That unsettling, raw, radiant energy that came from your authenticity. You didn't need a spotlight because your spirit lit up the room. You didn't need to control anyone because your confidence was rooted in truth. That was foreign to them. It was threatening. A narcissist's world is one of illusion, smoke, and mirrors, ego, and image. Everything is about appearance, not substance. Everything is about control, not connection. But you were the glitch in the system. You couldn't be controlled. You couldn't be manipulated for long. Because deep down, you were rooted in something real, something they didn't understand. Integrity, empathy, and self-awareness. You see, narcissists thrive in darkness. They survive by staying hidden behind charm, manipulation, lies. But your presence was like flipping on a floodlight in a haunted house. You revealed what they tried to keep buried. You exposed the dust, the decay, the rot. And in doing so, you forced them to see themselves, if only for a moment. But that terrified them, it shook them, because for the first time, someone wasn't reacting to their bait. Someone wasn't afraid of their temper. Someone didn't fall for their charm. You challenged the narrative they told themselves. And when people like that feel exposed, they retaliate not because of you, but because of what you awaken inside them. You see, you weren't just someone passing through. You were sent, positioned, strategically placed. A divine interruption. A living contradiction to everything they believed about power, love, and control, and they couldn't handle it. So they did what broken people do. They projected, they attacked, they discarded. Not because you were weak, but because you were powerful. You were the light, and light never apologizes for shining. Light doesn't ask darkness for permission. Light doesn't need approval. It just shines. And you shone even while they tried to dim you. You gave truth in a world built on lies. You gave patience in a space of manipulation. You gave loyalty to someone who was loyal to no one. That takes strength. They tried to convince you that you were too much, too emotional, too intense, too sensitive. But deep down, they knew the truth. You weren't too much, you were just more than they could handle. Your presence made them confront their emptiness. Your heart made them face their hollowness. Your soul reminded them of what they lost long ago. Here's what you need to understand. Your presence alone was a threat to their false power. Because real power doesn't need to prove itself. It just is. And that's what made you dangerous to them. You didn't need to play games. You didn't need a mask. You were real. And nothing terrifies a narcissist more than realness. Your journey through their darkness wasn't a mistake. It was a mission. And even if they never admit it, even if they paint you as the villain, you were the light they never expected. You were the teacher they didn't deserve. You were the blessing they couldn't receive. But make no mistake, your light didn't die in their storm. It grew brighter. The pain sharpened your awareness. The betrayal deepened your strength. The rejection clarified your purpose. You didn't lose yourself, you found yourself. You didn't break, you broke through. You were the interruption that exposed their dysfunction. You were the mirror that reflected their truth. You were the evidence that healing exists, that love can be pure, that strength doesn't need to shout. And when they rejected you, they rejected their last chance at redemption. They'll remember you, not for what you said, not even for what you did, but for how you made them feel, for the light you brought, for the peace you carried, for the truth you stood on, and no smear campaign, no lie, no act of denial will erase that impact. You were the test they couldn't cheat on. Some people go through life cheating every system they encounter, faking emotions, manipulating outcomes, hiding behind personas. Narcissists are world-class at this. They pretend, they charm, they deceive, but then you walked in and suddenly the game changed. Because you weren't a test they could rig, you were the test they couldn't cheat on. And that scared the life out of them. You weren't operating on their frequency. While they played mind games, you brought presence. While they told stories, you spoke truth. While they crafted illusions, you embodied reality. You weren't interested in their mask, you were drawn to their soul, and that's the very thing they've spent their life hiding from the world and from themselves. At first, they were intrigued by you. They thought they could control you like the others. They thought they could predict your moves, manipulate your emotions, and twist your boundaries. But you weren't like the rest. You asked real questions. You saw through the facade. You listened with intention. You connected with essence. You became something they didn't plan, for an X factor they couldn't decode. And that, right there, created a storm inside them. Because a narcissist thrives in environments where they are in control, where they dictate the emotional climate, where they are always 3 steps ahead. But with you, their script didn't work. Their usual lines fell flat. Their manipulations bounced back. Their tricks were ineffective. You saw them, and that terrified them. See, when someone's entire identity is built on manipulation, the worst thing that can happen is meeting someone immune to it. You didn't fall for the flattery. You didn't stay silent during the gaslighting. You called them out. You held up the mirror. You didn't just demand honesty, you embodied it. You were the mirror they couldn't cover up or crack. They tried to rewrite the narrative. They tried to make you doubt yourself. They used their favorite weapons: blame, projection, withdrawal. But no matter what they did, they couldn't twist the outcome in their favor. Because your presence revealed the truth. It wasn't a battle of words, it was a battle of energy, and your energy, unshakable. Understand this? They studied everyone before you. They knew which buttons to push, which insecurities to exploit. But you were different. Your strength didn't come from performance, it came from pain transmuted into power. You weren't confused about who you were. And when someone like that walks into a narcissist's life, it creates panic in their soul. Because you were a test of character, not charisma. A test of integrity, not image. A test of depth, not deception. You weren't impressed by what they pretended to be. You wanted who they really were. But when someone's real self is hollow, they can't withstand that level of inspection. So they did the only thing they knew how to do: sabotage the connection. But here's the part they didn't see coming. When they tried to sabotage you, they sabotaged their own access to real connection. You weren't just an option, you were an opportunity to grow, to evolve, to be loved in a way that didn't demand perfection but presence. But they failed, not because you were flawed, but because they refused to rise. And now that you're gone, they know it. Deep down, even if they never admit it, they know they failed. They failed to deceive. They failed to dominate. They failed to replicate the same old game that always worked until you. You became the interruption in their cycle, the anomaly, the one who held them accountable without even trying. And the reason they still talk about you, think about you, watch you from a distance is because you were the one they couldn't conquer. You became the unsolved equation in their life, the enigma that defied every strategy they relied on. You were the one chapter in their story that didn't end the way they planned. But don't mistake their obsession for affection. What they miss isn't the real you, it's the control they lost. It's the validation they no longer get. It's the game they can no longer win. Because now you've evolved, you've leveled up. You see everything clearly: the manipulation, the cycles, the pattern. And you're done. You're no longer in their classroom. You've graduated, and now they're the student left behind, still trying to find a way to pass a test they were never ready for. But it's too late. The answers were in your presence, and they threw it away. So walk tall, head high. You were the test that exposed the truth, the test they failed, and that truth, your truth, set you free. You are the consequence of their deception. Every narcissist walks through life believing they're untouchable, that they can lie without repercussion, that they can manipulate without consequence, that they can destroy people and walk away clean. But then you arrived, and you weren't just another chapter in their story, you became the plot twist they never saw coming. You weren't the victim of their deception, you were the consequence. They thought they could toy with you. Like they toyed with so many others before. They thought you'd be another name on their list, another soul wrapped around their fingers. But you weren't there to play the role they cast for you. You were there to disrupt their delusion. You were there to bring balance where they had sown chaos. You see, life always has a way of bringing balance. What you put out returns. It may not be immediate, it may not be obvious, but it's coming. And when a narcissist spreads lies, pain, confusion, and betrayal, something or someone will eventually show up to break the pattern. That someone was you. You didn't need revenge. Your presence was the justice. Your clarity revealed their confusion. Your boundaries exposed their lack of integrity. Your loyalty made their betrayal louder. You were the contrast that made their chaos undeniable. You didn't just enter their life, you exposed the mess they had hidden for years. And they hated that. Because for the first time, their manipulation didn't give them the upper hand, it handed them a mirror. For the first time, they realized they couldn't spin the truth fast enough to stop you from seeing what was real. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. You became the one thing they feared more than exposure: accountability. It wasn't about punishment. It was about reflection. You became the walking proof that their lies were catching up to them. You didn't chase them down, you didn't scream their name in the streets, but your growth, your peace, your refusal to break that was louder than any revenge could have been, that was the real consequence. Because here's what they never counted on: you healing, you thriving, you turning their chaos into clarity, their betrayal into boundaries, their abuse into awareness. That kind of transformation doesn't just leave an impact, it creates a ripple effect. And whether they want to admit it or not, you changed the course of their story. They may try to rewrite it. They may paint themselves as the victim. They may even try to erase you from the narrative. But deep down, they know the truth. You were the one who wouldn't let them keep getting away with it. Not with your energy, not with your soul, not with your time. And the reason they lash out, the reason they try to smear your name, is because they're still trying to outrun the consequences. But consequences aren't always about what happens to you. Sometimes they're about who walks away from you. Sometimes the greatest judgment is losing access to the very person who could have helped you heal. You were that person. You were the one who offered patience, compassion, truth, and connection. You were the safe place, and they burned it down, not because it was flawed, but because it revealed their flaws. You were the home they couldn't afford to live in, because they kept refusing to pay the price of honesty. You didn't just confront their actions, your entire being was a confrontation to their dysfunction. You were the spiritual bill that came due, all the lies, the games, the damage they caused to others. It culminated in you, not because you were a punishment, but because you were a lesson. And just like with every lesson, they had a choice: grow or run, evolve or repeat. But they chose the easy way, the same way, the old way, and now they're haunted by the echo of who you were. Because you were the one soul they couldn't erase with manipulation. You were the fire they couldn't put out with silence. They'll keep telling themselves you were the problem. That's how they cope. That's how they survive. But every time they try to replace you, every time they try to mimic what you gave so freely, they'll realize consequences can't be avoided, only delayed. And you were the one that made that truth unavoidable. So don't look back with shame. Look back with power. You weren't just a chapter in their story. You were the climax, the wake-up call, the karmic correction. You were the consequence. And it's time you owned that with pride. You are the awakening they resisted. There comes a moment in every narcissist's life when the universe sends someone who doesn't fit their script. Someone who doesn't bow, doesn't break, doesn't beg. That moment is meant to wake them up, shake them to their core, confront their dysfunction, and you were that moment. You were the awakening, the opportunity for real transformation. But instead of embracing it, they resisted. And in resisting you, they resisted their own breakthrough. You didn't come into their life to destroy them, you came to ignite something deeper. Your love was fierce, not foolish. Your loyalty wasn't blind, it was built on purpose. And the moment you entered their world, everything started to shift. The lies they used to believe about themselves, the manipulations they used to control others, none of it worked the same way anymore. Because your energy didn't feed their ego, it exposed it. You saw through the games, you noticed the inconsistencies. You didn't just hear what they said, you felt what they meant. And that's what made you dangerous to them. Because while everyone else danced around their dysfunction, you stood in front of it and said, "This stops here." You didn't come to play a part in their fantasy. You came to challenge the illusion. See, a narcissist operates in a dream world where they're always the hero or the victim. Never the villain, never the cause, never the one who needs to change. But when you showed up with truth, clarity, and conviction, their mirror cracked. They couldn't pretend anymore. You represented reality, and reality was their biggest enemy. You asked the questions no one else dared to. You brought a love that required presence, not performance. You weren't impressed by the surface. You wanted the substance, and that's where the war began. Because to rise to your level, they would have had to face their wounds, admit their lies, apologize for their damage. That kind of awakening requires humility, and they just weren't ready. So they chose the easier road, resistance. Instead of leaning into your light, they ran from it. Instead of opening their heart, they built more walls. Instead of growing, they gaslit. Instead of being honest, they projected. But here's the part they'll never admit. You shook them. You rattled their false self. You disrupted the lie they told the world. And themselves. You weren't sent to fix them. That was never your burden. You were sent to awaken them, and that's exactly what you did. Whether they embraced it or not, your presence lit the match. And now, every relationship after you feels empty. Every new connection is compared to the way you saw them, the way you challenged them, the way you loved them, even in their brokenness. They didn't reject you. They rejected the process. The pain of facing themselves was greater than the reward of being loved by you. But make no mistake, their life is now divided into two timelines, before you and after you. And the aftermath is filled with the echoes of an awakening they chose to ignore. And maybe that's the hardest part for you, knowing what could have been, seeing the potential, remembering the moments when you thought the light was breaking through. But that's not your failure, it's their refusal. You offered the most powerful gift anyone can give, a mirror and a path forward, and they chose to shatter the mirror instead of walking the path. But don't ever regret being that awakening. Because even if they never change, the seed was planted. Even if they keep running, the memory of your voice, your truth, your strength, it follows them. You were a wake-up call dressed as compassion. And even if they close their eyes tighter, the sound of that call doesn't go away. You showed them a version of life that was honest, raw, healing. You showed them what it feels like to be truly seen, and that was the most terrifying thing they'd ever experienced. Because once someone has seen you without judgment, you can't know that level of exposure. You can't forget the safety, the connection, the truth, and while they may wear a mask for the rest of the world, they'll never forget that you saw their face. You saw the child inside the chaos, the fear behind the pride, the pain behind the arrogance. You were the invitation to transformation, and they slammed the door, but the knock echoes still, so keep your head high. You were not a mistake in their life, you were a miracle they weren't ready for. An awakening they resisted, and though they may never thank you, life will reward you, because you stood in truth when it would have been easier to fall into fantasy. You were light in a world addicted to shadows. You were the one soul they couldn't control. That's the narcissist's drug of choice. Not love, not connection, not intimacy, control. It's how they feel powerful. It's how they feel safe. It's how they hide the deep, gaping void inside them that they don't want anyone to see. But then you came along, and you changed the entire game. Because no matter how hard they tried, you were the one soul they couldn't control. They used every tool in their toxic arsenal. Charm, guilt, gaslighting, silence, rage, lies wrapped in sweetness. They tested you, pushed you, watched you, studied you. They tried to figure out what made you tick, how to disarm you, how to own you. Because once they could own your emotions, they believed they'd own you. But your soul, your spirit, it wasn't for sale. You didn't respond the way others did. You didn't chase when they pulled away. You didn't collapse when they criticized. You didn't beg when they withdrew love. You stood your ground. You asked questions. You trusted your instincts, and that infuriated them, because their power doesn't work on someone who has already awakened to their worth. That's what scared them most, your awareness, your ability to see through the games, to hold your line, to stay rooted when they tried to shake you. And they couldn't admit it, but it made them feel powerless. And when someone addicted to power feels powerless, they panic, they attack, they distort. They do everything in their ability to crush the one thing they couldn't control, your mind. But the more they tried to manipulate you, the clearer things became. The more they twisted reality, the more you anchored in truth. Every time they tried to rewrite the story, your presence reminded them of the original script. You were like gravity, unshakable, undeniable. They wanted you to break, but you broke free. It wasn't that you were cold. It wasn't that you didn't care. In fact, it was the opposite. You cared too deeply to let manipulation win. You loved yourself enough to walk away when staying meant self-betrayal. And you had the courage to risk being misunderstood rather than being controlled. That level of strength, it terrified them. They weren't ready for someone who couldn't be puppeteered, who wouldn't fold under pressure, who wouldn't trade truth for peace. You were a mirror they couldn't smash, a storm they couldn't calm, and the more they realized they couldn't control you, the more desperate they became to destroy the image of you. That's why they smeared you. That's why they told lies. That's why they acted like you were the toxic one. Because in their twisted world, anyone they can't control must be dangerous. Not because you were actually a threat, but because you represented freedom. And freedom is something they've never been able to experience or tolerate. But here's the real victory. You didn't lose your soul trying to keep the peace. You didn't abandon yourself to maintain the illusion. You held the line. You chose your sanity. You walked away with your dignity intact. And even if they never admit it, they know deep down that you were never weak, you were untouchable. They'll meet others. They'll repeat the cycle, but no one will echo in their mind the way you do. Because once you've met someone who can't be controlled, you can't forget them. You can't unfeel the presence of someone who stands firm in truth. You were the mountain in their storm, immovable, unapologetic, and unforgettable. And maybe they didn't say it. Maybe they never will. But you were the soul that taught them the one thing they never wanted to learn. Real power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself, and that's exactly what you did. So stand tall. You didn't lose anything by leaving. You didn't fail because you couldn't fix them. You won because you didn't let their darkness swallow your light. You won because you kept your integrity. You won because you refused to be controlled, and in doing so, you became the greatest threat to their illusion. You didn't just survive their games, you shattered them. You didn't play small, you rose. You didn't bend, you stood. And now, even if they wear a new mask and play a new role with someone else, the ghost of the one they couldn't control, you will always linger in the background. You were the wild card in their deck, the one they couldn't predict, the one they couldn't own. You were the soul they couldn't manipulate, bend, or break, and that is your power. Own it. You were the divine disruption to their darkness. You weren't just a person who crossed their path. You were a divine disruption, a force sent by something greater to interrupt the cycle they were addicted to. You were a cosmic assignment, a spiritual collision, a living, breathing wake-up call in human form. And the reason they tried to destroy you is because they couldn't handle the light you carried. When someone walks in truth, when someone lives in authenticity, when someone radiates purity of heart, they become dangerous to those hiding in deception. You didn't expose them with your words. You exposed them with your presence, with your peace, with your power, with the calm clarity in your eyes that said, "I see you." And that shook them to their core. You were the light that crept in through the cracks of their carefully crafted mask, and it terrified them. Because when someone lives in darkness long enough, the light doesn't feel like healing, it feels like threat. It exposes things they buried. It forces them to feel emotions they've numbed for decades. It demands they confront the damage they've caused. And most of all, it invites them to change. But change requires humility. Growth requires pain. And narcissists avoid both like fire. They'd rather destroy the mirror than change the reflection. They'd rather demonize the truth, tell her, than face the truth. So what did they do when your presence started to dismantle their delusion? They turned on you, they attacked you, they projected all their shame onto you. But what they didn't understand is that you were never their enemy, you were their opportunity. You were the detour they needed, the interruption they prayed for without even knowing it. You were the chance to heal generational wounds, the possibility of real connection, the miracle they never thought they deserved, and they rejected it. And listen, that rejection wasn't your fault. That failure wasn't your responsibility. You didn't fail your assignment just because they failed to receive it. You showed up with love, with fire, with truth, with courage. And they weren't ready, they weren't willing, but the presence of a divine disruption never leaves things unchanged, even if they go on pretending. Even if they lie to themselves and everyone around them, even if they silence the voice that spoke through you, it echoes. Because once someone's been touched by truth, they can't unknow it. Once someone's been seen by the divine through you, they can't unfeel it. You were the disruption that marked their soul, and maybe you've wondered why it had to hurt so much, why it felt so personal, why it left you so broken. But you need to understand this divine assignments come with divine resistance. The brighter your light, the more violently darkness tries to snuff it out. They didn't hate you. They hated what you represented, a different way, a higher road, a truth that called them out of hiding. You were not weak for caring. You were not naive for loving. You were brave because you stayed soft in the presence of cruelty. You were strong because you didn't become like them. You were chosen because only someone as spiritually aligned as you could carry that assignment. And even if it left scars, those scars are proof that you showed up with everything you had. The aftermath may feel brutal. You may still hear their words, still feel their shadows, still carry the ache of being misunderstood. But that pain, it's not punishment. It's the residue of purpose. It's the friction of transformation. Because divine disruptions don't come to make things easy, they come to make things right. They might never apologize, never change, never acknowledge what you were, but that doesn't diminish the truth. You were the interruption that exposed their lies, the lesson wrapped in love, the chapter that could have rewritten their entire book if they had chosen to read it. But just because they closed the book doesn't mean the story didn't matter. And now, your job is not to wait for their awakening. Your job is to walk in yours, to rise, to heal, to shine brighter. Because if you were powerful enough to disrupt their darkness, imagine what you're capable of when you pour that power into your own purpose. The mission isn't over. It's just getting started. You weren't placed in their life so they could complete you. You were placed in their life because you were already complete and they needed an encounter with the real. You were the divine disruption they prayed for in moments of silence. They just didn't recognize the answer when it arrived in human form. And here's the wildest part: even if they rejected the disruption, you fulfilled the assignment. Because disruption doesn't require validation. It doesn't wait for applause. It just does its work. And now, you've done yours. You shook the walls of a broken system. You challenged a manipulative spirit. You held up the truth like a torch in a tunnel of deceit. So walk away not with bitterness, but with boldness. You were the divine disruption to their darkness, and the fire you carry, it's not going out. It's just moving on to where it will be honored, respected, and celebrated. Keep walking, fire starter. Keep walking, truth speaker. The next assignment is waiting, and this time it's for you. You were chosen not to be broken, but to awaken. Let's take a breath and let this truth settle deep into your bones. You weren't cursed. You were called. You weren't placed in the narcissist's life by accident. You were placed there by assignment. Every moment that confused you, every word that shattered you, every silent treatment, lie, smear campaign, betrayal, and manipulation, it wasn't to destroy you. It was to unleash you. You were the mirror they couldn't shatter, the lesson they didn't want, the love they didn't know how to receive, the truth they couldn't twist. And yet, even in the pain, even in the chaos, even in the devastation, you stood. Bloodied, yes, shaken, absolutely, but still breathing, still rising, still reclaiming your soul from the wreckage. Because here's what the narcissist didn't count on. They didn't count on your healing. They didn't count on your awakening. They didn't count on the day you would stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start declaring, "Now I remember who I am." That moment, that sacred, furious, electrifying moment, is when you broke their hold forever. You were the assignment in their life, but they were the catalyst in yours. They activated a version of you that had been buried beneath people, pleasing, silence, shame, and survival. They cracked you open, and in the rawness of that pain, something divine poured through your truth, your voice, your fire. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about proving anything to them. This was always about you. About waking up to the fact that you were never created to be controlled, manipulated, discarded, or diminished. You were created to light up dark rooms, to speak truth where there's deception, to break generational chains with your presence alone. And now you carry something they'll never take from you: wisdom, a fire that can't be faked, eyes that see through masks, a heart that knows the cost of staying silent, a soul that will never again settle for counterfeit love. You've graduated from the fire, not burned, refined. You don't need them to acknowledge your worth. You don't need closure from someone incapable of truth. You are the closure. You are the full circle moment. You are the evidence that even when the enemy sends destruction, heaven uses it for elevation. You are the warrior who walks away not bitter, but blessed, not broken, but built. So let this be your declaration to the world: you are no longer hiding. You are no longer shrinking. You are no longer tolerating abuse and calling it love. You are stepping into the fullness of who you were always meant to be. And anyone who cannot handle your light is not your assignment, they are your past. From now on, you walk different, you speak different, you discern quicker. You choose yourself first, not out of selfishness, but out of divine wisdom, because now you know, not everyone who wants your light deserves access to it. And not everyone who calls it love knows what love actually is. You were placed in a narcissist's life to disrupt their illusion, but you were also placed in their life to discover your power. You didn't just survive, you transformed. You didn't just escape, you evolved. And now, every scar, every tear, every lesson has become part of your anointing. This is your season of reclamation, your season of becoming, of shedding every identity they tried to force on you, of burning the mask they handed you and stepping out as the fierce, raw, radiant force you were always meant to be. You are not here to play small. You are not here to be palatable. You are here to shake world. So rise, not as a victim, but as a voice. Not as someone who barely made it out, but as someone who carries the blueprint for others still trapped. You are a lighthouse, a force of freedom, a divine disruption that walks in purpose. And now that you've awakened, the world will never be the same again. You were placed in a narcissist's life for a reason, and now that reason is walking in power. That reason is you.